I'm Mr. Beat, and I'm in love with the U.S. Constitution.
I don't even.
It's like my favorite Constitution ever, seriously.
I mean, relatively speaking, I guess. But that's really only because of the Bill of Rights. A society based on the Constitution without the Bill of Rights would be one of the worst societies ever. A society based on the Bill of Rights without the rest of the Constitution would be one of the best. But before we get into this, I just want to mention that this video was requested by Darth Fenrir. If you'd like to recommend a video for me to debunk, just use the donation link below to go to my Patreon or Subscribestar and become a supporter at the $2 level.
However, it's not perfect, because things change, man.
The Constitution is a document of universal principles. Sometimes, like in the case of slavery in the past and income tax today, they get the principles wrong. Other times, like freedom of speech and the right to keep and bear arms, they get it right. But principles are either always right or always wrong. They don't change with the times. So if you're basing it on how things are at the time or how things change, you're doing it wrong.
They knew that over the years the Constitution would have to be amended or changed to reflect a changing country.
No, they knew that they weren't perfect and couldn't get everything right.
Thomas Jefferson once even wrote to his buddy James Madison, quote, "Every constitution then and every law naturally expires at the end of 19 years.
That's not what he meant. He meant that government would tend to grow beyond what the Constitution expressly limited it to be. Later in that paragraph, he wrote, "The people cannot assemble themselves. Their representation is unequal and vicious. Various checks are opposed to every legislative proposition. Factions get possession of the public councils. Bribery corrupts them. Personal interests lead them astray from the general interests of their constituents. And other impediments arise so as to prove to every practical man that a law of limited duration is much more manageable than one which needs a repeal." And if you want a perfect example, later in the letter he wrote, "We have already given an example, one effectual check to the dog of war by transferring the power of letting him loose from the executive to the legislative body, from those who are to spend to those who are to pay." But that's not the case now, is it? We go to war at the whim of the president while an impotent Congress just sits on their thumbs. Jefferson was right. So nice quote mining.
And those first 10 changes came quickly. Just 3.5 years after the founders ratified the original Constitution, they ratified the first 10 changes, commonly referred to today as the Bill of Rights. This was to get those pesky anti-federalists on board with the rest of the Constitution.
It was the states they needed to get on board. The Constitution wouldn't take effect until 9 states ratified it, and they weren't getting that without a Bill of Rights. Most states ratified it on the condition that a Bill of Rights would be forthcoming. 2 of them, North Carolina and Rhode Island, refused to ratify it until the Bill of Rights was in place. And it wasn't 3.5 years after the founders ratified the Constitution. That was when Congress proposed it on September 17, 1787. It wasn't ratified until the 9th state, New Hampshire, ratified it on June 21, 1788, and it took effect on March 4, 1789. Basically, the first thing Congress did was work on a Bill of Rights to meet the conditions of several states, including Virginia and New York, who ratified in the interim, and get North Carolina and Rhode Island on board, with Vermont following in March of 1791. Official ratification of the Bill of Rights was December 15, 1791. Come on, you can just look this stuff up. Why do none of you doofuses possess basic research skills?
So why is it so freaking difficult to amend the Constitution? Well, we can blame the founders. The founders wanted it to be difficult to amend so that the government was more stable and to lock in their great ideals, you know?
It was because they didn't want it amended on the whim of politicians who were pushing their own agendas.
They also didn't trust the masses much.
No, they trusted the masses. They didn't trust politicians.
But there have been some unintended consequences to making the Constitution difficult to change.
Let me guess. It doesn't let government do things that you like, right?
You see, now we often rely a lot on the Supreme Court to just interpret the Constitution differently to push reform forward. I don't think most of the founders saw that one coming.
Yeah, they did, and they warned against it. In a letter to William Charles Jarvis, Thomas Jefferson wrote, "To consider the judges as the ultimate arbiters of all constitutional questions is a very dangerous doctrine indeed, and one which would place us under the despotism of an oligarchy. Our judges are as honest as other men, and not more so. They have, with others, the same passions for party, for power, and the privileges of their corps. The Constitution has erected no such single tribunal, knowing that, to whatever hands confided, with the corruptions of time and party, its members would become despots. It has more wisely made all the departments co-equal and co-sovereign within themselves. I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society but the people themselves." Looks like Jefferson might have had a point with the 19-year thing.
Here are my top 10 proposed constitutional amendments.
All right, let's take this on.
I want to lower the voting age to 16.
Yep, called it.
16 and 17-year-olds often work and pay federal income taxes, and they're also legally allowed to drive and can be tried as adults if they commit crimes.
And they can also be easily coerced and manipulated. Just look around at the people who want this age lowered and you'll see. There are always people who want government to be much bigger than it is.
Congress cannot make any laws that apply to American citizens that don't apply equally to themselves, and vice versa. This seems like common sense, and you're likely surprised right now to hear that it's already not part of the Constitution.
Actually, it is. It's called the Equal Protection Clause, and there are a few other scattered clauses to that effect as well. The fact that it's ignored just speaks to my earlier point. But if they're going to ignore it in one place in the Constitution, why would they not just continue to ignore it in two?
The next one is an actual proposed amendment almost ratified in the 1970s, known as the Equal Rights Amendment, or ERA.
Oh, for the love of Mike, all of the functional parts of the ERA were passed over the course of about 150 years. That part from the 1970s is just the leftover part, which is really pretty meaningless. But that didn't stop narcissists pushing an agenda to use it to grandstand. I'm old enough to remember when this happened, so don't try and sell me a bill of goods about it. I was there. So again, we see what side he's on, and it's not on the side of natural rights and small government.
And here's another actual proposed amendment, nicknamed the Saving Democracy Amendment.
You are aware that America is not supposed to be a democracy, right? Maybe in your meticulous perusal of the Constitution, you missed Article 4, Section 4.
Section 1. The rights protected by the Constitution of the United States are the rights of natural persons and do not extend to for-profit corporations, limited liability companies, or other private entities established for business purposes or to promote business interests under the laws of any state, the United States, or any foreign state.
Yeah, this guy doesn't like the Citizens United case. See all my previous videos on that. Let me ask you this. What part of a business or corporation isn't people? Answer, none. That's what they are. People who have gotten together for a specific purpose. And you want them to lose rights when they do. So as soon as you get together with your buddies to pool your resources in order to be able to amplify your voice, which you'd need to do if you're not already rich, Mr. Pete would immediately step in and take it away from you, basically guaranteeing the right to the means of speech, which costs money, to the rich. That's exactly what Citizens United was about. A group of people got together to form a nonprofit organization and produced a documentary critical of Hillary Clinton. The Federal Election Commission shut them down. Illegally, as the Supreme Court ruled. So again, why should they lose their rights to speech, especially political speech and the ability to publicly criticize politicians, just because they pooled their resources to get their movie posted to video on demand services? He goes on to say how he wants such entities to be regulated, completely abrogating his earlier bleating about how no one should have special privileges, and then wants to take away their right to participate in the electoral process.
Well, as one of my YouTube viewers wrote, quote, "If corporations are people, then they should be able to receive the death penalty. Oh, snap. I agree."
Really? The death penalty for speech? The death penalty is evil enough as it is, but you want to use it for speech?
Term limits for Congress and the Supreme Court.
I mean, this one I can get behind, but how does he square it principally with the rest of his proposals? I'm not seeing much consistency here.
Amendments become part of the Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 2/3 of the states or by conventions in 2/3 thereof.
Yep, he wants amendments to be made more easily, which, considering the stupid crap he wants in the Constitution, stands to reason.
The Electoral College will no longer pick the president.
Of course, could have made money betting on that one.
American citizens will directly elect the president.
Because you want rich cities to choose the president, with poor and rural areas basically having no say. Because they pick the Democratic politicians you like.
I'm still for federalism here.
No, you aren't. Let me clue you in on why the Electoral College exists. The founders specifically didn't want popular election of the president for the reason I just mentioned. They didn't want the rich areas choosing and leaving the poor areas with no say. The only alternative that existed at the time was the parliamentary method, whereby the houses of parliament, in this case Congress, would choose the president. But they didn't like that either, because they didn't want Congress to be able to threaten the president's job if he didn't do what they wanted. So this was their solution. Another parliamentary body in equal numbers to Congress that existed solely for the purpose of choosing the president and vice president. This is not antiquated like you claim. The reasons for it not only still exist, if anything, they're even more of a concern today. If you make any change to the Electoral College, make a constitutional amendment giving them proportional representation and end the winner-take-all system we have now. That would be closer to the founders' ideas and solve a lot of the problems we have. All you want to do is make those problems worse. All to protect your elite. Another way to solve a lot of the problems and restore the founding principles is to end all official recognition of political parties, which our founders didn't want. And also end all restrictions on so-called faithless electors.
And if you think I'm naive about the importance of the Electoral College, you are sadly mistaken.
Yeah, except I'm not. Your video on it is just full of straw man arguments and ridicule, and doesn't even acknowledge the real reason it exists, which I just explained. And I kid you not, folks, one time he even says right out that he doesn't want people in rural areas to have their say. Direct quote. But today, less than 15% Americans live in rural areas. No offense to those living in rural areas, but why should you have that much leverage over everyone else? That urban elitism is exactly what he wants. He wants his rich, powerful elite to run roughshod over people in rural states. But our rights do not cease to exist just because we're outnumbered. Our founders understood that. Mr. Beat doesn't care. By way of analogy, blacks are also roughly 15% of the population. What if he'd said, "No offense to black people, but why should you have that much leverage over everyone else?" He'd be condemned as a hideous racist. The whole point is that you amplify minority voices. That's one big difference between a democracy and a republic. In a democracy, minority voices get shouted down. In a republic, you amplify their voices so that their rights are protected. He doesn't want that because his team is in the majority.
The 17th Article of Amendment to the Constitution of the United States is hereby repealed.
So, yeah, I agree with this, but haven't you just spent this whole video whining about how we're not enough of a direct democracy? Why do I have a feeling there's a catch?
Because guess what comes next?
Here we go.
The U.S. House of Representatives will have 930 members.
Just wow. And he even admits...
And of course would also make it so that there would be 1,033 electoral votes, assuming the Electoral College still existed.
To throw things even further towards his beloved elites.
Oh, and you might be wondering where I'm getting that 930 number? I just pulled it out of thin air. Just kidding, I got it from an article, this article here by Chris Wilson.
Who just pulled it out of thin air.
Wilson uses math to limit disparity in representation,
by which he means give more power to Democrats.
One big bonus for increasing the representatives in the House is that it would make gerrymandering more difficult.
And by more difficult, he means easier to do but harder to detect.
The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of political beliefs.
Except everything else you've proposed would do exactly that. And again, we already have the Equal Protection Clause that's supposed to be doing that. If you want to do anything, how about a constitutional amendment formalizing the principles behind Norwood v. Harrison? Specifically that, if government threatens, incentivizes, or colludes with a private company, the private company is considered a state actor and the Constitution applies. Or for another one that supports the founding principles, how about any bill that wasn't actually read by the members of Congress who voted for it is automatically void? And this is just off the top of my head. Or how about the pay of Congress members and the president shall be limited to the median household income? Here's actually one from the Confederate Constitution I like. Every law or resolution having the force of law shall relate to but one subject, and that subject shall be expressed in the title. Yep, no more riders, no more crap added into the NDAA, no more omnibus bills. I mean, really, this is the list you came up with after thinking about it? How about one that says laws and regulations shall be written so as to be understandable by everyone who will be compelled to comply with the act? You could have proposed an amendment banning indefinite detention, or prohibiting the prosecution of whistleblowers, or formally establishing conduit protections and extending them to copyrights, or undoing the Bail Reform Act, or ending qualified immunity, or protecting our right to strong encryption, or right to repair, or jury nullification, or protecting one's ownership of one's own personal data, or any of dozens of others I could probably rattle off. But no, you only proposed amendments that empowered your elite, not that empowered the individual to be protected against the elite. And that is why the founders made amending the Constitution so difficult, because of people like you. So thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe, leave a comment, and go to donate.bogosity.tv to keep me doing what I do. And check out all the great content here, like this video selected just for you.